Hi, and welcome to my ivy glass house. Today I'm going to share with you how to create your own beautiful winter wreath. First of all, we're going to head over into the garden, get foraging for my favourite wreath materials, which are grapevine like this one here and wisteria. Then we're going to get making and start creating a really beautiful sturdy wreath, not using any wires or artificial materials. And then I'm going to jump into the studio and I'm going to show you how to decorate it using some beautiful birch branches and other little seed pods, and just share what I find really fascinating about the history of the wreath. Okay, if I was to choose my absolute favourite vine to weave and bind with, this one is it. This is an ornamental grape. We have it growing here and in this sort of alfresco area, and every winter it gets the hugest cutback, which I just adore because then I can go crazy and make 1,000 wreath vines out of it. So it is, you can see that it has the most gorgeous tendrils on it, which just dry beautifully. And when it's also just in autumn leaf, it's lovely to use as well because the leaves kind of crinkle up and dry beautiful burgundies and pinks. So yeah, great vine to use for wreath making and basket weaving. This little guy I absolutely adore. I wait all year for the pods to dry out in winter, and it's from a western red cedar tree. And I just love these little star-shaped flowers that are created by the pods. And yeah, they're absolutely perfect now. Now I'll show you later on when we put the wreath together how we can use just a couple of little branches of these cedar pods into the design to add movement and add something really delicate and soft. This is another fabulous vine to use to create wreaths and random weaves, and it's wisteria. Very common in Australia, probably all over actually, and considered to be quite invasive, but absolutely drop dead gorgeous in spring when it comes into flower with these beautiful lavender grape, racemes just hanging down all off it everywhere. So this is quite grey, has a beautiful grey texture to it. The vine is a little bit thinner than the grapevine, but I find it's just as easy to manipulate, and it's always best if you're picking your vine fresh so that it's still green rather than dried, and it becomes quite brittle to use. Let's get creating. So I've got my beautiful grapevine, as you can see here, and this delightful mess that I absolutely adore at my feet. People often ask me in regards to the sizing of your wreath and how you can create, a certain size, and really it's up to the material that you're using. The more pliable the material, the thinner the vine, the smaller the wreath. The thicker the vine and the more dense and heavy that it is, then the larger wreath you'll be able to create. So with this one here, I just get myself a nice long piece, and you can see that it's quite pliable. That's fabulous, that's perfect, just what we want. Now, when you're creating your basic shape to start with, you want to make sure that you create the circle as small as you can, or the size that you want, but creating it to be quite tight and small will increase the tension in the vine and will allow it to stay together much easier than if you make it really loose. So you can see there I have just attached one end around itself and attached it kind of just back on itself. There's no need to use any twine. I don't usually use any twine for my wreath designs. I just simply use the vine itself and the tension that it creates. And I'm just going around gently, not making that too tight because you'll put too much tension and it'll break. And if it does break, it's no deal breaker. You can tie it up with twine. Just with a little offcut of twine, attach it where it's broken, and then the next piece of vine will go over the top of that and will hold it all together anyway. So it's no big problem if it snaps. I just get myself another bit. And I usually try to insert that into the, the space between two of the stems already, again, just to create that tension. And I also find that with the grape, it also will allow the these little bits that will hang on to each other. Sometimes they're not in a good way. And we go around and through and around again. I try to use the same variety of vine as well, rather than mixing it between, say, the wisteria and the grape. I quite like the continuity of the same colour, the same same texture of the same vine. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't change it and can't mix it up. You're more than obviously able to do that. So taking that through again. Around. And just keep building on that until you're happy with the density of your wreath. I quite like to have little pieces escape so that it's not really completely tight, and that also allows you to, if you wanted to put a spray or a little design or a focal feature in that area, you're allowing some space for that to happen. Okay, just keep threading through. This is such a tactile technique. It's very therapeutic, actually. It's quite meditative, and your children actually will love it. This is really something that I think it's really a very easy technique to teach children, and because it's being created so quickly, it's not something that loses their attention, but and it's really just the fundamentals of weaving. So once you've sort of mastered this sense of balance and sense of tension, you can, and just, allowing the material to go in the direction that it wants to go. If it's bending a certain way, go with that. Let your material, boss you around a little bit. So just building. And you can see there's only a few little pieces of vine that I've used, and it's creating, a really lovely shape and a good size for a door or a wall hanging. It's coming together really nicely. Sometimes what also happens when I'm creating a wreath base is that it's quite an odd shape to start with. I'll show you just in a second what I mean with the wisteria, because it's already in a really sort of strong shape already, and it can allow you to create then something that's more oval or almost like a picture frame type of rectangle shape, which is also really lovely. So threading that through, spits. So for my florist friends out there, I really encourage you to get foraging and creating your own beautiful botanical wreath bases. I know it gets tempting when you're busy to buy the pre-made ones from this sundry supplier that are most likely made in China or overseas. But you can see how easy it is and cheap, very inexpensive to make a beautiful wreath base that has a lot of character and a handmade feel, and you just don't get that from pre-made wreath bases. So I encourage you to spend a little bit of time in the garden, go for a forage, and create your own beautiful wreath bases for home. Okay, now before we finish up, I just wanted to go back and show you when you've foraged with a vine that's kind of odd shapes like this beautiful wisteria. It's gorgeous, but you might be looking at that thinking, I wonder how I can make a wreath out of that. Go with the flow of the vine, as I said. When you've got a little piece like this, I tend to just wrap that around the main stem. Rather than cutting it off, it adds another sense of tension and bulk to your design. That little bit broke anyway. And can you see that like just lends itself to coming around, but then also quite straight there. So I would leave that there like that. And actually I'll go around this bit as well so you can see what I mean. So just any of those bits that kind of are two legs together, just twist them up so they become one, and they're a lot easy to deal with. Okay, so I'm going to leave that little bit there. That might be really interesting. It might hang really beautifully. It might allow an area for it to kind of get suspended. So don't be tempted to cut that off just straight away. I'm going to bring that through there. Thread from the end through. You'll find that that's a dead piece there. That's why that's so brittle. Okay, so you can see that I'm just taking this around. The wisteria is beautifully and soft and really easy to manipulate, and it's got this gorgeous silvery grey colour. So you can see also this bit is quite weird. It's a little brittle and it's a little firm, but I'll see if we can use that as well. And I quite like that it would be able to kind of curl around in here. We can also cut those other pieces off as we go if we feel like they're sticking out too far or they're kind of resisting and stopping it from sitting against the wall nicely. So we're bringing this little bit in here. And finishing that off with some of that little short bit in there. So you can see this one is a lot more free form than the grape wreath that is, much more easy to make uniform. But I kind of like it still, and I always like things that are quite odd. Anyway, so I would just tuck a few of those ends in. Again, you can always use a little twine, but I quite like the oval shape. I think that's like a beautiful little picture frame and something that we could dress really lovely with some really fine materials. So speaking of which, let's pop in back into the studio and I'll show you how to just lightly dress your winter wreath. So now we have our beautiful wreath all created. I am such a fan of wreaths, to be honest. I actually love them bare like this, especially in winter. I think they're such an epitome of a winter wreath. But if you did want to create a focal area, there's a couple of ways that we can do that. And what we need to consider first is looking at the area on the wreath that allows a little more space. If you remember, I mentioned earlier, creating some that kind of escape from the initial circle will allow some more air and more space where you can easily create a focal area that integrates really well with the base. When we're considering decorating or adding a focal area to your wreath, there's a few different options available to you. You can completely cover the wreath frame. You can add a couple of little focal areas, and you can also do this with not just your dry botanicals like we've foraged today, but also fresh material. Beautiful fresh flowers added to these rustic bases is just so gorgeous. So I look forward to showing you a little bit more about that in a future wreath video because it's quite technical and there's a few different techniques and tips that I show you to be able to add fresh material, foam free, so that you're also hiding a water source and allowing your fresh flowers to have their full vase life of a week or more on your beautiful dried base. But for now, let's decorate very simply the design that we've created today for our winter wreath with the forage materials that I picked earlier. So I have some of this absolutely beautiful silver birch branches. These are the seed pods from the silver birch. They're quite delicate and they can often have a little explosion, but the colouring is gorgeous. I love the shape and the movement of these branches. And again, adding another bare element, but the softness of these little droplets can just lighten up your wreath base a little bit. So I'm looking at this bottom area as being the most focal area. As I said before, it's got the space to do that. And I'm looking at the curve of that piece of birch, and you're just threading it through. And basically, because that's also fresh, I'm just doubling it back on itself into the wreath frame. Another one there, another really beautiful shape. Threading it through those branches and just securing it. If you wanted to, you could also potentially use some twine and just tie these on with twine. So if they've got a little bit more weight about them and you find that they're slipping for any reason, you can do that. Now we might take this little piece over onto this side. Again, you're just threading it through. And that one I'd like to continue this lovely line down. Just threading that in. And this beautiful piece we might take a little bit further up. We're allowing some space in the center here for our little red cedar pods, the gorgeous little wooden flowers, and we'll add those to that little focal area. So you can just see I'm just wedging that in. Take that around that little curly bit. So you'll find that some of those lovely curly bits of the vine are holding it together. Something else that I wanted to share with you about wreaths is the tradition of a wreath. Wreaths signify unity. They're the circle of life. And you'll find that a lot of European countries, it's a tradition to actually create a wreath at the start of every season, hang it on the door of their home or their front gate to celebrate the next season, and also signify a sense of unity and harmony within the home. I love that idea. I'd love that to become a tradition in Australia. So, you know, once you've created your beautiful wreath base, then you can just seasonally decorate it if you wanted to. So you can see I'm just adding these little gorgeous little seed pods. Again, looking at the shape of each little pod. Now keep in mind these are actually dried elements, so they're not as pliable as the birch, but they're sitting in there really nicely, and they're so light that you know, when you're putting them in, they haven't got any weight to, you know, be kind of falling out of it or being hard to deal with. Just taking that through there. Okay, so I think we're nearly finished. Just adding this last little gorgeous piece of cedar flower. But I can see there that it needs a little something else in the focal area. It needs to draw your eye into that center, and all of the other material is quite light. So what I've got here is some dried leucadendrons. So leucadendrons are a South African wildflower, and they dry really well. They keep that quite just a little bit of that burgundy color. You can see the leaves are curled and quite silvery and a beautiful texture. So just threading those again through those stems. and just allowing that to hold it in place. And again, these are dried, so they won't be too easy to manipulate, but they'll thread through quite easily. And again, they're quite light. So that's given you kind of more of a focal area that allows you to kind of go into sit and rest in the middle and your eye to continue back out of the design. I hope you've been inspired. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial and it has encouraged you to get your hands busy, go and forage for some beautiful pliable bare branches and create your own winter wreath to hang on your home, to hang on your door, or to hang out in your beautiful garden.